Welcome to the Alphagenics podcast, where every week we speak to incredible guests from the world of health, well-being, longevity, biohacking, and of course, men's health. And today I'm delighted to introduce Lynn Hatch from Feel Well Health and Wellness Coaching. Lynn, we've known each other for probably close to 20 years, but we had very different hats on at the time, didn't we, when we first met? Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your journey?
Oh, hi, Ross. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure always to chat with you, but particularly about a topic that I'm so passionate about. And so, yes, I was very lucky that you were my physio back in the day. Our company chose to use you. So that was my background in that corporate world, in industry, in commercial roles for, around 20 years. And then my mum's cancer journey took me down a very different path. Watching her kind of for 5 years, and then ultimately her death in a hospice really transformed my outlook on the world. It was a very sort of groundbreaking moment in my life, really. And as a result, I resigned without a job to go to, but just knew I wanted to go and work in palliative care and make people feel like we had felt as a family during that time. Because, of course, it's not just about the loss of the person and their experience, it's the people left behind afterwards. So I did. I was very fortunate to find work in a local hospice up in the northeast of England. And that's where I was for 4 years. And it was while there that I saw the impact that really quality care can have, listening, giving people time, signposting them, supporting them, because it's so bewildering, isn't it, when you're in that situation often, trying to navigate the systems, like the NHS, wonderful if it is, it can be hard. And I began to think, gosh, I really love this. I probably should always have been in this field. Didn't really want to retrain as a nurse, though, because I've got a family and I'd been abroad a lot with my previous corporate job. So I thought, well, what's the next best thing I can do? And I came across health coaching, and that's where it all started.
Amazing. And how long ago was that?
It's a good few years ago now. So I ended up doing both roles for a while. I want to do everything. But actually, after a while, I realised that there was so much demand for health coaching, a real need. And to do it well, I needed to give it my full time. So reluctantly, I left the hospice, but still continue to raise funds for them and really value the work that they do.
Brilliant. And for anyone who's listening who perhaps hasn't come across health coaching, they know what a doctor is, they know what a physio is. Where does a health coach sit? And what is your mission? What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ross. And actually, a lot of people ask me that because health coaching is still relatively new in this country. In America, most people would probably know. And so think of a health coach in the simplest terms as your personal cheerleader for your health. And I love that term. Who wouldn't want their own cheerleader?
Yeah.
Going a little bit deeper than that, though. So it's all about the science of behaviour change and grounded in positive psychology. So it's an accountability buddy. It's somebody who can help mentor you as well. So think of a life coach plus plus. So we have to do a lot more training in things like nutrition, modifiable lifestyle factors, because, whilst we know that everybody's the expert in their own life, they're often very bewildered and overwhelmed by kind of health. There's so many misnomers, aren't there, out there? There's so many headlines that change and shift week to week, and people just often don't know where to start. Yeah. So people will often come to a health coach because they just don't feel good anymore. They might feel just, meh generally, just feel all right. And I'm not prepared to just feel all right anymore. Or it might be more serious than that. They might come because they've just been given a diagnosis of a chronic illness, or they might have just been told by their doctor that they're kind of pre-diabetic, or they've got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and think, oh gosh, that's a bit of a wake-up call. I think I better do something about it now.
Yeah, and you're right. There is such an array of information now at our fingertips. We can ask Google anything. In fact, now we can ask ChatGPT anything, and it'll trawl the whole of Google, and it'll come back with the answers. But for every question you ask, you can find polar opposites. What should you do to, or what drives high cholesterol? Well, for 50 years, we've been telling everyone it was fat, and now we're pretty sure it's sugar. Should I eat a plant-based diet? It's the best thing ever. And then other people saying, no, that's going to give you an early grave. You want to eat carnivore. So I guess that's where what you do really comes in, and you can take someone through a process and work out what's right for them, because think you're on the same page as me, you know, firmly of the opinion that there is no right or wrong. It's not as easy as that. You know, we're all different, and we just got to work out what works for us, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're a recent guest doctor, Indra, you know, so I trained as a functional medicine health coach, very aligned, well, inspired by Indra and your introduction to her. So again, I'm grateful to you. But it was about, you know, really recognizing that individuality. And, you know, exactly that, you know, you'll pick up a newspaper or a magazine, they'll say, you must do this, you must be keto. And, you know, it might make you feel absolutely dreadful. You know, Tim Spector's work and the Zoe Project is absolutely groundbreaking. You know, really personalizing nutrition finally, because food literally is medicine. And I know Indra said that as well. But I just want to share, actually, I've got permission to share a current client story with you, just to show the power of changing small things. And this is really where health coaching comes in, it's small steps and building momentum. And we can maybe explore a bit how kind of behavior change works, but just a gorgeous story. Within 2 weeks, somebody's health really transforming. So gorgeous guy, he's very humorous. I absolutely adore being with him. And he got to the point where, so his early 50s, was kind of overweight and very aware of it, eating a lot of processed food, moving, but probably not as much as he needed to, 2 children. And started to notice that joints weren't great, getting injured more often when he was trying to run, energy, mood, not great. And various things came together, and he said, Lynn, actually, I want to work with you because actually this isn't all right anymore. I think, you know, sometimes when we get to that late 40s, early 50s point, you know, suddenly we realize we're not invincible and kind of life choices catch up with us. And he was in that camp, just overwhelmed, just completely didn't really know much about food. But somebody had said to him, if you swap a normal potato for a sweet potato, then that's a bit healthier. And he was like, oh gosh, I didn't know that. So he said, Lynn, can you help me make some more swaps like that? And he's one of my ideal clients because he took action straight away. So we had this session. And what we do with a client when we start with them is we explore their goals. You know, why do they want to do this? Why now? What is important to them? What's their vision for a healthy life? What are the motivating factors? It could be that they've got children they want to be around for, or grandchildren they want to be able to get on the floor with. It could be that they want to, you know, achieve some kind of adventure in their life. They want to be able to go traveling, you know, when they retire. It could be that they just want more energy. They literally want to be able to get out of bed without dragging themselves every day. There was always, you know, a key point for them. Then we look at kind of the reality with them, what's going on now, what's stopping them, what are the barriers, the friction. We explore all of the options. We look at how they've been successful in the past, what's worked, and we really harness that success. And what could get in their way going forward? You know, what are their away from motivators? You know, it could be things like, I don't want to be in pain anymore. What are their towards? So, you know, where are they trying to get to? Looking at very small actions to get started. So back to this story. For him, it was looking at some of the habits he'd accumulated. So one of them was mid-morning, I have an apple, a banana, and a packet of crisps. It became a habit. Now, he'd got a very sedentary job. That's a lot of calories mid-morning for somebody who's not really moving.
Yeah.
And obviously processed food in there as well. A banana is quite high in sugar in terms of fruits, you know, nothing wrong with them, but you just want to be aware of that and maybe switch out for something like berries, you know, which might be a bit lower sugar. Yeah. And so just being able to give him some information around that. Looking then what he was eating in the evening, so very process based, you know, a lot of carbs. And then not only dinner, but then we'd sit down television afterwards, you know, something we all often do to relax. And out would come the chocolate bar, again, another habit. And it's only when you start to unpick these things and question them. But the classic that so many people say, and I actually popped an article about this on LinkedIn yesterday, was people believe they're eating healthily because of the marketing spin, because of what it says on the packet. So I get so many clients who come to me eating lots of breakfast cereals, and they believe that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Actually, you know, again, that's processed food. This was never food that we were designed to eat as humans. And we can end up consuming a lot more calories. You know, our brains don't get the signal that we're full necessarily. And you talked about sugar, and obviously there's a lot of added sugar often in these. So again, just helping to make that switch. And now he's eating berries and Greek yogurt or oats and making his own muesli. He's completely, I think he'd had 2 packets of crisps in 2 weeks when I saw him last, changed his evening meals radically. So I sent him a load of links to recipes. I talked about trying to get 30 different plant foods in his diet. You know, that's a big challenge I set for people, trying to eat the rainbow.
Yeah.
And he just went away inspired. And literally that afternoon, he sent me his shopping receipt with all these beautiful foods in there. And so when I saw him this week, he looked different. It was really visibly different. And he said, I've lost my shelf on my belly, Lynn. I can't believe it. In 2 weeks, the difference. And I said, well, what else? That's a great coaching question. What else? Mm-hmm. I feel better, actually. I've got more energy. My mood's better. And I'm sleeping better. And of course, we know that sleep is the foundation of health. So that's music to my ears, but that just to encourage your listeners really that simple changes have a dramatic effect. And of course then you get that ripple, don't you, because I feel better, so I'll move a bit more, you know, and that was the case for him certainly. So yeah, sorry, I could go on all day.
No, that's an incredible story, and there's loads of great things in there to kind of unpick and discuss. But you're right, sometimes you just need to break out of that negative spiral. One thing changes and you spiral back up. As you say, you feel better, so you exercise more, put that together, you sleep a bit better. From a men's health point of view, we create more testosterone when we're asleep, drives your energy again, you know, and it's just this lovely positive spiral. A couple of things in there though. One, I mean, what's obviously really important as any sort of coach, and it was the same as a physio, is the power of your questions, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Good questions will almost always lead to the correct answer. And if you ask the right questions and listen for long enough, most patients will not only tell you what's wrong with them, but they'll also tell you how to fix it. So that is incredible. I mean, from a physio point of view, I was always of the opinion that nobody ever came to physio to get rid of their bad back. They came because their bad back was stopping them from picking up their kids, as you said, or stop them from hopping in the car and driving to see their girlfriend, boyfriend, or whatever. And actually, it was that connection that really we're missing, not just the fact their back was sore. So yeah, the power of questions is super important. The other big thing I picked up on what you said there was we've all fallen, or many people within the population have fallen for this incredible marketing in big food. And I had a conversation with someone just a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Ross, you know, I've been listening to what you've been telling me, want to make some changes. So I've been thinking of maybe swapping my Cocoa Pops for Oaty Bigs. Do you think that's a good idea? I was like, not really. No, it's still the same. Maybe a little less sugar, but why don't you try an omelette or something like this? But this marketing has gone so far. As you say, most people don't know they're not eating a good diet.
Yeah, and I think we've got very much into this habit of eating quite a sweet breakfast, haven't we, in this country? And I was recently over in Berlin in Germany, and I was really struck by that continental breakfast again, the cheeses, the hams, and yes, okay, some ham can be processed, but it was good quality. And good, you know, German brown bread, you know, lots of goodness in there. And actually I switched my eating while I was there, and I felt so full all morning because of course we get that protein boost then in the mornings. So yeah, lots going on. Just back to your point on questioning, absolutely powerful. You know, often we don't need to say a lot at all as kind of healthcare professionals if we listen, but it's that listening bit that's so often missing, I think. You know, if we go to see a typical professional, they're very busy, they're rushed, they don't necessarily have time to listen. And I also teach health coaching. And one of the things that my students notice very early is when they develop this active listening skill, how poorly most people listen that we encounter. We listen to respond, don't we, in conversation? You know, you might tell me, oh, I've just had a really bad day. And I go, oh, yeah, me too. This has happened to me. And I take it off my, you know, or as you're listening, I'm thinking, oh, that's triggered a thought for me. And I'm off in my own little world. So there's real power in terms of our health and having somebody to listen to us as well.
Most definitely. I love that old saying. I don't know if it's true or who it was attributed to, you know, but you have one mouth and two ears. So you listen more than you speak. Another thing you mentioned in your story, which I think is a fantastic way of positioning, is you're just going to swap something. You're not depriving yourself of something. You're just switching it, just swapping it out. So potato, sweet potato. What a powerful idea that is. You're not saying you can't eat potatoes, which then people go, oh, but I love them. It's just going to switch it. It sounds softer. It sounds easier to achieve, doesn't it?
Or still have your potato, but have a bit less and bulk up your plate, your half your plate with your other vegetables instead, your sort of cruciferous vegetables, which are so good. And actually, you raise a good point. This same client said to me, I can't believe how easy it's been. He said, I've kind of put it off for so long because I thought it was going to be really painful because he loves his food. You know, he's eating and he's thinking about his next meal, he said. You know, food's important to us. I love food. So what we did was do it in a way that was sustainable for him, so he didn't feel like he was missing out at all. And of course, when we start to cut down on the sugar, we crave less sugar. You know, we can still fill ourselves, but with more nutritious stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And we talked a bit off air before that in a lot of these shows and in life in general now, I guess if you're looking for the right information, the same things sort of pop up. Improve our diet, improve our sleep, improve our exercise, be conscious of you know what we're putting into our mind as well, look after our mental health. We all probably know that, but we don't all do it. And that's where this behavior change comes in, isn't it? That you've mentioned sort of briefly before. So what is that? Why don't we always take this advice when we're giving it? And is there anything we can do? And you got me to fill in a questionnaire yesterday, didn't we? Which we're going to talk about. And I've still got no idea what that is, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so well, as I mentioned before, so health coaching is grounded in positive psychology and behavior change. And so for a long time, psychology was all about the pathology of us as humans. So what's wrong with us, the ills of the mind. And then you've got the likes of Martin Seligman and Michael Csikszentmihalyi and people like that who researched into kind of how we flourish and thrive as humans, you know, how we can get into that flow state and a state of awe and how amazing that is for us. And a lot of work went on to look at kind of these common virtues, these strengths that we have as humans that are valued really across all nationalities around the world. And if you look back at the Stoic philosophers, they were talking about this kind of stuff as well. And so this field of positive psychology emerged a few decades ago. And that is great because that looks at our strengths, and we really use those a lot in coaching because, you know, you've got some great strengths, and actually if you can use those to help your behavior change, then you're more likely to succeed. So Ross, is it all right if I share your top character strengths that came
100%. Yeah, let's do it and dive into it.
Okay, so for you, it came out as hope, curiosity, honesty, fairness, and forgiveness. And when you saw that, what were your first thoughts?
That they were positive things in my mind. Obviously, someone else maybe with a different perspective might not have seen that, but for me, they were positive. They didn't strike me as anything, you know, particularly driven or fast. It all feels quite sort of, you know, patient and slow. So these were the sort of words that I guess I associated with them.
Brilliant. So the premise is that we've all got these 24 strengths that come out in this free VIA character survey, but with different levels are distributed differently. So in a way, it's a bit like your DNA. So we've all got the, you know, DNA made of the same substance, but we've all got a special, unique combination of it. And so if you take this test, then it tells you what your top strengths are, you know, from number 1, which is hope for you, all the way down to 24. So these character strengths really seem to reflect our personal identity. They're core to who we are as humans, and they produce really positive outcomes. So, you know, we know that that's very linked to our health. And if we kind of are very aligned and in touch with these, then actually they're the ingredients of better relationships, creating stronger families, stronger communities, and actually really build a better world overall. They're all about what's right with us. You know, they help us to do good and be good, and to bring forward the best parts of ourselves. So I would be very much harnessing those, you know, when I'm working in a client session saying, you know, do you remember what they are? So I'm always kind of reminding people. Yeah. So it's a lovely thing, isn't it, to be reminded of our strengths? And I'm spotting them as they're talking. I'm going, okay, I can see that you were very honest with yourself there, Ross, because you just told me that actually didn't go so well this week, and this is why. So strengths are a really important part of the work. The other thing that's important in behaviour change is looking at stages of change. There's a guy called James Prochaska who's done a lot of work. He's got this trans-theoretical model of change, looks at different stages. And I often show a client a picture of this as well, because so many times I have a client who has kind of been all in, they try and run 10K before they can even walk, 5. And they set themselves almost up for failure, and they do this repeatedly. And then that self-talk begins, and gremlin or self-talk is really detrimental to us, because actually our bodies can't differentiate between that saber-toothed tiger and what we're saying to ourselves. We're provoking that stress response. We kind of diminish our belief in what we can achieve. So the stages of change, we're looking at where a client is on this, if you imagine like a spiral staircase, right from that first stage, which we call pre-contemplation, when they don't even know that they need to change, to that contemplation where they need to, but they're thinking about it. And it's that point we can often get stuck and get quite ambivalent. It's kind of, it feels really hard. That the cons seem to outweigh the pros at that point. Yeah. And so actually when we can explore that, and going back to what I said about exploring the vision, the motivation, that's where we can get over that inertia and take that first small step. So then we go into preparation stage, and people can get stuck there too. It's like, I need to drink more water. I need to buy a water bottle. And I had a client recently, but I don't know what type, I don't know what spout, what colour, what design, or what would be useful. And so I think it took her 3 weeks to go and buy a water bottle to be able to drink more water. And it sounds daft, but friction like that can really hold us back. Yeah. Personal experience of me, I met somebody probably 15 years ago now, after I'd had my first son. And she was a Pilates instructor, and that Pilates wasn't massive at that time, to be fair, like it is now. Mm-hmm. And she told me the benefits of it. I was like, that's what I need. I've got a bit of a bad back. I'll come. Well, it took me nearly a year to get to her class. And do you know why? It's because I didn't know what to wear. There was no Sweaty Betty or whatever that around there is now, and things like that hold us back so easily.
Definitely. Yeah. I was chatting about this with someone the other day, actually, and we were talking about one way to try and improve that is to think about the first, second, third, and fourth degree consequences. Mm-hmm. So if someone says, I want to eat that Kit Kat, well, what's the first order consequence? It probably tastes really good. What's the second? The feeling doesn't last very long. Second one, you're going to be hungry again in an hour because your blood sugar falls. And the fourth one is actually, if you keep eating Kit Kats, you're going to be overweight and you'll be unhealthy. So to try and think of those fourth order consequences instead of always the immediate first order one. To go, if we go back a little bit, how do you use those 24 traits? Mm. How do you use those to your advantage as a coach? So my top one was hope. Mm. What does that mean? And what does it mean for you as a coach? So you have that in front of you. Does that change your conversation? Does it change your questions? Or does it change the approach you take with someone?
So as I said, I'm strength spotting all the time, reminding them of them. If they're struggling, perhaps a little bit with sort of self-belief, I might set them exercises around their strengths. There's so much you can do on this, like go and actually work on a particular strength that you really want to enhance. And you can align it then to the actions that they agree to take with you and say, actually, you're really hopeful about this. I had a client, this week who's got a really difficult family situation going on. I think her top strength is hope as well. And she just said, so knowing that I've got hope there, actually, I know there's an end to this in sight. It gives you a different perspective and outlook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you always, because in my head now, there's two ways you could go. You could either double down on your strengths and make them stronger, or do you actually go to the bottom of the list and say, this is where you're weakest, so let's try and up that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would always go towards the top and enhance those, because they're who you are innately. And I've worked in places where they focus on your weaknesses, and it's quite demoralizing, isn't it? And it takes so much more energy. So why not harness what we've got and really utilize those to the max?
Yeah. Work on what you're good at and make you even better.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So if someone is struggling, so they've come to see you a couple of times and you've talked about switching things, you've talked about, positive spiral. Are there any things that you can do to interrupt that thought process? Like, are there any techniques that you use in coaching that perhaps people haven't come across?
So we I've got a neuro-linguistic programming, some training in that. So we might use some things around that. I'm looking at language. There's limiting beliefs. So often we've got those from childhood, from experiences we've had where, we've got quite a fixed mindset, and really saying, well, what's your evidence for that? Classic with a client recently who's trying to walk more. She literally sits at her desk for about 12 hours a day. And literally we wanted her to get out for 10 minutes at lunchtime and build on that. But even that is really difficult. So it's like, well, what's going on for you? She's managed to get to the bottom of it, that actually she thinks that if she goes out, then she has got this belief that she's this belief that she's lazy, and that she won't come back and carry on with her work. But when we've unpicked it, there's just no evidence for that at all. So it really depends on the client. I'll also be looking for trauma indicators as well. So obviously there's kind of what we call big T trauma, which is things like abuse, bereavement, car crashes, but also small T traumas, things that happen to us in life. And trauma gets really stuck in our body and affects what we call the HPA axis, that's stress response. And people can become really hypervigilant, very defensive, and that can really affect behaviour as well. So I'll be looking for things like that, and gently kind of explain to them what's going on. Recently had a client who was very stuck in that state and very sort of negative in her mindset, and that exacerbated her pain. And so we've been working together for, I think we've had 9 sessions, and we've just finished, and she's in such a different place. We've been on such a journey together, really, kind of from I don't want to be here to what do I value about being here, getting people always to look at the positives, change their perception. Sometimes just allowing people time to talk and explore. As you said, they've got the answers in themselves most of the time. We are the experts in our lives. We know what we need, but we can get stuck down this railway, kind of track, can't we? And sometimes you just got to step off.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's interesting that you go back to that. I mean, I guess that's the functional medicine doctor coming out in you as well, isn't it? Where we don't just look at the symptom, you go to the root cause, and a lot of our root causes do stem from the mind, and certainly from our childhood. So it's fascinating to sort of delve into that, what really makes someone tick. And I think in the life, or the world that we live in now, it's a highly stressful world we live in, isn't it? We've been bombarded all the time with information. With phones are never very far away from us, and constantly pinging, and it's very easy, I think, to get into this constant state of stress. I think you mentioned, millennia ago, that would have been when a saber-toothed tiger appeared in your cave, and you had to have that cortisol and adrenaline so you could run away. Now it's all the time. We're being bombarded, and it's tiring. It wears people out. And I guess that's when you start making bad decisions, and where the type of work that you do can really help someone to break out of that.
Yeah, that nervous system regulation, I think, is really the key area for people. Going back to what Dr. Indra, your recent guest, said about, the amount of time that people are spending in what she called that yellow zone, was it that there should have been in it, I think, for half an hour every 3 days, which would have been when we went to hunt for the animal and then calm back down. But now, we're permanently almost stuck in it. And there's a great chart that I always show when I go and do corporate talks, for example. There's a book called The Healthy Deviant by Pilar Herrasimo, and she shows that this chart of really the evolution of mankind, and how there's been this long period, hunter-gatherer lifestyles, kind of very in tune with nature, and then within really a very short period in our human history, we've had the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the digital revolution and transformation, and that has completely changed the way that we live. And of course, there's this gap now between our evolutionary biology and our lifestyle. So, how can people understand that? It's not their fault that they're responding like this. Their bodies and brains haven't caught up with the lives that we live now.
Yeah, our bodies have been, and the brain has been a certain way for hundreds of thousands of years, and then in the last 100 years, life has changed so much, hasn't it? And I think it's changed from a diet perspective. It's changed from an exercise point of view. We talk a lot about testosterone, obviously, alphagenics, and it's halved in 50 years. But think about it realistically, our diet is terrible. We don't exercise as much. We're more sedentary. We don't work in the fields anymore. We don't need to. So it's not surprising, if exercise drives testosterone production, sleep drives testosterone production, and good quality food drives it, well, all of those are worse. So it stands to reason it's going to go down. Complement that with toxic chemicals in our food and in the plastics and in our water. We're going to be negatively affected. But I think another thing we have to consider is all of those things have also completely changed the family dynamic. If you go back 100 years, we weren't all sent off to school. We often learned in small little communities, and we still worked very closely with our mum and dad. Young boys had their father figure there, whereas then they all went off to work in the cities. And I think that has had a big impact on the world. I don't know, do you talk about things from that point of view? Do you talk about the family dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. So that community, I know you've been to one of the blue zones, haven't you, personally? Dan Bretner's research on kind of where there's the most centenarians in the world and what are the facets that make that so. And it's that food, it's that movement, but community is huge, isn't it? And again, a client of mine who's really struggling, she lives alone. And actually I can sense that she's very lonely and lost her purpose as well. Purpose is a big thing we talk about. So it's about, kind of, it's holding a mirror up when I'm coaching people, enable them to see themselves perhaps in a new way, and replaying perhaps, for the first time their own words, and they hear it very differently. So for sure, sense of community is huge.
Yeah, big one. The Japanese call it ikigai. Myself and my daughter were going to that blue zone, Okinawa, together next year, which I'm really looking forward to. But I think one thing that we've touched on there a couple of times, and this was explained to me years ago by a psychologist, I think, that our brain is so incredible. It can think about, a gazillion different things in a single moment. So it's easy for us to get anxious because we're not actually solving anything. We're thinking about every permutation, and we go to the nth degree and it's all bad and the world's going to end. But when you verbalize it, so when you talk to a health coach or a physio or your friend or a therapist, your brain processes it at normal speed and you find your answer. Whereas if you're not speaking it out loud, it's just in your head, you can't see the wood for the trees. So you end up becoming more stressed. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that comes out of whether you're working with yourself or a physio, a therapist, whoever it might be, or just talking to your friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that really helps, so not just talking it out, but having that accountability, because I think as humans, we can talk ourselves in or out of anything, can't we? And rationalize things. But knowing that you've got to go back and report a week or 2 weeks later on your progress is a really big driver. And obviously that's not, you don't want that as kind of a dependent relationship long term, but it can, again, get us over that hump until we can create these habits. And, I know you will have read James Clear's Atomic Habits or, BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, but they talk about, behavior change being sort of a mixture of motivation, ability and prompt. So it's about, kind of what are you going to hook this new habit onto? Where does it fit naturally? And making it really small, making it appealing, have some kind of reward at the end. And I don't mean necessarily a food reward, which we would often use, but it, could be like every time I go out and do a walk, I'm going to put 50p in a pot and that's going to buy me a holiday at some point in the future. Or I'm going to treat myself to a massage, or I'm just going to sit and have a cup of tea if I get this task done.
Yeah. I love that idea of a reward. I think that can be really powerful, and the habit stacking as well. So one of my favorite things to do, with physio all those years ago, was to use habit stacking. So people would say, I haven't got time to do my exercises, Ross. And we probably talked about this as well. And I'd say, well, how many times do you make a cup of tea in a day? How many times do you talk on the phone during the day? Well, we'll probably add them together, maybe 15. Okay, well, every time you stand up and you're waiting for the kettle to boil or you're on the telephone, lean backwards, lean left and right. They're back movements that are going to be contributing to your improvement. All right, well, I can do that. So we just stack in the habit. This is something you do anyway. Subconsciously, you make a cup of tea. So while you're doing that, lean backwards. I can do that. Or while you're brushing your teeth, those things.
You just pinged me back then. I remember standing in toilets at work, and after I've been to the toilet every time, I would do a hip flexor stretch, as per Ross's instructions. So you're absolutely right, and it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of just incorporating new habits or desirable traits into old habits. So what about supplements then? Is that something that comes into what you do as well? We've talked about changing things, but do you recommend any supplements that people could take, or do you recommend specific types of exercise, or do you just leave it up to them?
So on the supplement front, I'm not a nutritional therapist. They do years of study for a reason. And I think it's an area that we're very clear on our scope of practice as health coaches. What I've got is a great partner, again, somebody who you introduced me to, who I collaborate with, Julie Pickler, and she's a registered nutritional therapist. We actually run a program called Feeding the Mind that we take into businesses. We run with individuals, all about the gut-brain axis and lifestyle changes and things. But that's very much their bag. And personally, I had I could sense my hormones weren't right. So I did something called the Dutch test, very brilliant results from that in terms of, the depth that it goes into, because otherwise it's like stabbing in the dark, isn't it? And ultimately, I think you can end up sort of peeing this stuff literally down the toilet. So you've got to know what you're doing, because you can do more harm than good. So I wouldn't go there. Personally, that's not my remit. I'd refer on. In terms of exercise, I often talk about NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, with my clients, because I think I actually talk about movement more than exercise as well, because it's such a loaded word for people. I hated PE at school. Now I love moving my body. I've run a marathon and done things I never thought. But, we have a really interesting relationship often with it. So it's about encouraging people, to park that bit further away in the car park, to maybe, take the stairs rather than lift, things we've heard, but actually thinking about it and actively building it in, maybe getting a basket in the shop rather than pushing the trolley, so that we're using that functional movement of our body all day long.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that was one of the really big things that came out of the pandemic, because not only were people drinking more alcohol, probably eating more poor food, I would say, because they were at home, but the NEAT changed completely, because they weren't driving to work, parking in the car park, walking into work. They weren't going up and down the stairs, and if they lived in a big office several times a day, and they were literally just coming downstairs, still in their pajamas, sitting in front of the Zoom. So the amount of that non-exercise, what's it called again? I've totally forgotten.
Non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
Yeah, there wasn't there, because there just wasn't that same amount of movement incorporated into our day. We just sat with a shirt on the top half and our pajamas on the bottom half, sitting in front of the Zoom. So and I think a lot of people, that dawned on them. I think that's why a lot of people's weight went up, and there was a lot of problems, because it fundamentally changed for a long time, didn't it?
Yeah, I guess there are two camps though. The opposite of that is some people discovered the joy of cycling or walking with family and have been able to carry those habits on. Or if they've stopped now that they've gone back to work, again, that's the kind of thing I would be drawing out of my clients and saying, well, remember how it felt, what enabled you to do that? What would you like to do again? And often I talk about what they enjoyed as children as well. So if, again, exercise doesn't really appeal, perhaps they love dancing or hula hooping as a child, or skipping. There's a story I was reading last night of an 82-year-old who went to a health coach, and the health coach kind of was holding back telling her what to do, and didn't need to say anything, because in the end this 82-year-old said, actually, what I want to do is skip rope like I used to when I was a child. And she was like, okay, some slight risk here, obviously, with osteoporosis going on as well. So maybe if you have an imaginary rope to start with, and just start, build up from there, and finding a plan that really appeals, because we're only going to do what we want to do, aren't we?
Yeah, without a doubt. It's very easy, isn't it, to say, well, cycling's really good or swimming's really good, but the best exercise that you can do is the one that you enjoy. Because if you enjoy it, you'll do it. And unless you're doing it, it doesn't help. So I think that I think the best exercise is the one you enjoy, because you're going to incorporate it into your life.
And then I guess there's making other changes as well. So, for example, I'm at a standing desk right now, so I'm fidgeting quite a lot during the day and moving. And there's a phrase that your best posture is your next one. So it's just about shifting. And I sometimes, when I go into businesses and I'm doing wellbeing sort of work with them, I watch their staff and they're literally static, sitting for an hour at a time, literally don't move a muscle. And so even if you just stand up and stretch, and the physio, you're well on board with this. But
Yeah.
I think we forget that that's really nutritious for our body. It sends so many signals all around it.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I remember back in the corporate physio days, and people would sit for hours and hours, perhaps they've got a deadline, they've got to get it finished, so they weren't taking breaks at all, and they can sit for 4, 5, 6 hours and not move because of this pressure that perhaps placed on themselves, or in some instances has been placed on them.
And going backwards to what I was saying before about our bodies aren't designed to be like that, are they? And I'm sure you will have seen Tony Riddle's work, The Natural Lifestyle Guy, but he's got no chairs in his home. They squat, they kneel, they sit on the floor. That's how we were designed to be, but it feels very alien to us. He would feel like an oddity, but actually, if you look at what the rest of us are doing, that's the thing that's quite odd.
Yeah, definitely. And if you look at indigenous tribes around the world, they have far less osteoporosis and osteoarthritis in their hips and their knees, because they're putting them through a full range of motion. They go down into a full squat, whereas the average, even 40-year-old, probably doesn't do that ever. Maybe once or twice a week, they might go to a full squat if they drop something to the floor, but even then they probably bend in a different way. It's incredibly powerful, to put our bodies through that full range of motion, and we quite often don't in the Western world.
Yeah, that's right. And this functional movement, of course, will stop us, twisting to pick something up from a shelf, bending down to our grandchildren if we lose that.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, Lynn, I've absolutely loved talking to you. It's been a breath of fresh air. Loved every moment. How do people get in touch with you? So if they've listened to you talk, this is resonating, they want to make a change, and they think that you're the right person, how do they find you?
Oh, thank you, Ross. It's been really lovely to spend time with you. So thefeelwell.co.uk is my website. I'm on all social media platforms. Not always loving that, but LinkedIn is my favourite. That's where I tend to post more. So yes, you can find me there. So I do one-to-one work, corporate work, group coaching, and I teach health coaching for the Health Coaches Academy as well.
Absolutely amazing. Well, when we push this out, we'll make sure we put all of those links on there as well, so people can contact you. But Lynn, it's been a real pleasure. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Ross. You too.